Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. I've been coming to this conference for a lot of years. I've been in North Dakota since 2017. Before that, I lived in Wyoming and started my career out in the Powder River Basin. I've been with ONEOK for 5 years, and in this role for almost 3. We started to take a look at our reclamation of our pipeline right-of-ways a little bit more serious starting in 2022. What we're going to kind of talk about today, I'm going to go through a quick introduction. I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that we've implemented in our ORM reclamation program. And then I'm also a student. So we're going to talk about the research that we actually had the opportunity to do on ONEOK right-of-ways with the U.S. Forest Service on some of our pipelines on Forest Service lands. And so we're going to talk through some of the initial results that we've been getting, and then we're going to discuss the reclamation suitability tool and kind of get you guys a little bit familiar with that and how we're implementing that at ONEOK. Like I said, I've been here since 2017. My husband and I are also landowners. We live over in Fairview, Montana. We run a small herd of red Angus cows and some Texel cross sheep. And when work and school and livestock aren't enough, I train border collies. So I'm just glutton for punishment. So in 2022, I transferred over to the construction group to start working on this ORM reclamation program. And it was kind of a long time coming. ONEOK realized that we have a lot of projects and a lot of right-of-ways, and we cover a lot of ground in North Dakota, into Montana, down into Wyoming. We run from Crosby clear down to Dickinson and Belfield, all the way to the state line out to Newtown. So we have a sizable footprint. We're putting in probably 200 projects or more a year. So we cover a lot of space. And we recognize that we had not always probably had the best practices. I think a lot of operators recognize that, especially during the hustle and bustle and the boom days, we didn't do the best job putting things back because it was just moved to the next job. So we recognize that things like subsidence and weeds and erosion and revegetation were all issues that we needed to address, and that our landowners were frustrated with us, and we wanted to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And we wanted to help kind of address these things before they became an issue for landowners. So we started doing third-party inspections. We started looking at the previous 4 years of right-of-ways that were built. And really we said 4 years because that was 400 plus projects. And that's a lot of ground to cover. That's over 400 miles of right-of-way to send somebody to look at. So we've been doing this for the last 3 years. I have droves of people who go out and look at all this stuff, which means I have droves of people who call and let landowners know, hey, we're going to be out on your property. Do you have any other issues or concerns we can look at while we're there? And then all of that information comes back to me, and I get to manage it all and assign it all back out to contractors. So we wanted to also, kind of say, well, what are our major issues and how can we fix these things? So these are kind of some common things that we see. Poor seed establishment, and you can see we went and did a reseed. It's looking pretty good. Subsidence is a big one, and we really wanted to combat that. That's huge. You can't have that in somebody's farm field. You're going to eat a combine and it's going to be a bad day. So we said, we want to more clearly define our topsoil management. We want to clearly define our compaction standards and all of that stuff, which these are all things that we were doing. They were expectations that our contractors had, but when you put things in writing, it's a little harder for people to skirt around it. So we really clearly defined that topsoil segregation happens at color change. It's not a blanket 6 inches or 12 inches or whatever. So we implemented that, procedures around trying to reduce subsidence. So making sure that we have good compaction over the trench, because that's where you're going to see your subsidence most of the time. And then decompaction in those heavily traveled areas. We always have a travel lane, and a lot of times you're going to see less growth there. So this is kind of just a standard that we have in our documents that shows how you segregate your topsoil, your spoils, and how you just kind of set up your right of way. And this is, I mean, pretty much every project, there's a handful where we might not quite do it like this, but your spoil is always going to be separated from your topsoil. So the next thing that we wanted to look at that we knew would really help us in the long run was, what do we do around our seeding? And so we started in 2023, where every single right-of-way we build, every single one we touch gets straw mulched and crimped. And we worked with the NDSU. We have a very active relationship with them around doing research and trying to offer research opportunities. And they are trying to do things through their reclamation advisory group that are really related to industry. And so one of the first things that they did with us was working on straw mulching and crimping. So that was one of the first things we implemented. Like I said, we do this on every single right away now, and we've seen really great success. Something else we started doing was crosshatch seeding, which basically we ask our contractors to don't just seed down the right of way in one row. It's easy. It's way easy. But what we found is we had these rows. So this pipeline in particular was seeded in 2020. This picture was taken last summer. So we had a pretty good moisture year. That's pretty decent growth, but you can still see these lines. You can tell exactly where that drill was. And that's what we wanted to avoid, because we were talking to a lot of landowners and they're like, well, I know right where your right of way was. So we started doing the crosshatch, and I've got a couple example pictures. And then we also started broadcasting our cover crops. Your native range seeds and your cover crops have a much different seeding depth. So we told our contractors, we said, hey, start broadcasting your cover crops. And that way your range seeds are getting to the right depth. Your cover crops are sitting at the top. And we found that we've gotten a lot better establishment of our cover crops, but also of our range grasses. So here's an example of crosshatch seeding. It gets a lot harder to tell where the right away starts and stops when we start doing this crosshatch. This is a crosshatch in the early kind of beginning stages of growth. So you can see those lines a little bit better, but you can also see how that's going to kind of fill in a little bit nicer. And when we do this, we're essentially doubling our seed rate. But at the end of the day, seed is relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of what we do of putting pipe in the ground. So to throw down some extra seed does not hurt us, especially when we're finding we're not having to go back as much. When it comes to straw mulching, here's a couple examples of that. So we usually do a rate of about 1.5 tons per acre. If we've got some slope, we might be doing 2 tons. And then we're making sure we get a nice crimp in that. We're trying to make sure we get it spread as evenly as possible, which can be difficult, but the crimping is really helping to keep the straw in place, because we all know that the wind likes to blow in North Dakota. So I don't want my straw clear across the county. So we've been doing that, and it's also helping, with soil water retention. It's helping, with weeds and that kind of stuff. So we've been really pleased with how that is working and turning out. So on to our research that we did this last summer with NDSU around production and biodiversity. So we were looking for some different pipeline right-of-ways where we could evaluate these two things. For landowners and producers, it is super important to have that good vegetation production back, right? You're out there, you're grazing, you want the same amount of vegetation out there for your livestock to be consuming. And obviously a pipeline right away is going to disturb that. And then biodiversity, we always want to have, more diversity, more different species. We don't want just grasses. We want our forbs and our shrubs back. So we asked the Forest Service if we could look at some of our right-of-ways that we had built on them in the last few years. So We looked at 4 different right-of-ways. They were all built between 2020 and 2023. They were all winter builds with spring seeding. And the 2 older sites were just single pass drill seeded, where the newer sites, we had one that was crosshatch seeded, and we had one that we actually broadcasted seed and hydromulched. It was sitting in a low-lying area, a lot of clays. It was a very wet spring. We wanted to get something down, but we were really concerned about putting big, heavy equipment and tractors on the right-of-way. We were really worried about rutting things up. So once the contractor had everything cleaned up, we said, you know what, let's just broadcast and hydromulch it, and we'll just see what happens. So everything was seeded with the U.S. Forest Service Scenario 13 mix, which is what's in all of our pipeline easements with the Forest Service. So this is what that mix typically looks like. So the first thing we're going to talk about is production on and off right away. And essentially what we found is there was no significant difference between the amount of vegetation production we were getting on and off of the right of way on these projects, which is really exciting. To me, that is some of the best news I could hear. I think that that's fantastic. I love to know that the things we're doing and implementing and the way that we're watching these projects and making sure that we're getting them back is working. And as we continue to implement these across more of our projects, we should be getting more areas back into this good production. So the other thing we looked at was seeding rate. So that 15.2 kilograms per hectare would be the single pass. The 27.72 would be the broadcast and the crosshatch. With that, there is a caveat that we're not quite sure how some reseeding we did on some of the older projects might be affecting that. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what's going on. If we have a pipeline that doesn't look good, we're going to go take care of it. So, we did have one right away that we had gone back in and done some reseeding. It looked really nice. I think we did that reseeding in 2022. This data was all done in 2024. And then we also looked at seeding method. So you can see here that the yield was a lot higher on the single pass drill seeding, which once again may be contributed by the fact that we did go reseed in there. And then you can see that the crosshatch and the broadcast had lower production yields. These projects also were only a year old. So they were seeded in 2023. We sampled them in 2024. So it would be interesting to go back in another year or two and see what that production is looking like, and if we are getting similar yields to what we were getting on the older drill seeded projects. When it comes to biodiversity, I don't think this is too terribly surprising. There's not, we don't have the diversity on the right-of-ways yet that we do in the native, in the background areas. So I don't think that that's terribly surprising. This stuff takes time. It takes time to get the landscape back to what it was and to let this stuff grow. So that wasn't too terribly surprising. And once again, it'd be something that we'd be really interested in working with NDSU down the road to see in a few more years, what does that look like? Does it get better? Or is this something that we're always lacking in? We did have some different indicator species. So meaning these species were generally found in places that were off right away versus on right away. So that's some of the data here. Some of these are not surprising. They're pretty common native species to North Dakota that you would expect to find in those undisturbed areas. So the last thing I'm going to visit with you guys about is this reclamation suitability tool, which is something that the state soil scientists came out with, and basically looking at different soil characteristics. Can we say, or does this give us some sort of indication as to what reclamation is going to be like, or how hard it may be in different areas. So ONEOK took this and we put this into our own internal mapping system that we use when we are routing pipelines or planning pipeline projects. And so I kind of have a couple little examples here, and these are actually from these different Forest Service projects that we looked at as well. So as you can see, that dark purple is not suited. And we found that especially a lot of our Forest Service areas may say not suited, but we actually are doing a pretty decent job. So it really just is letting us know that these are going to be more difficult areas, that we probably want to look at our soil types. We want to look at our seed mixes a little more carefully. And from my perspective, I try to look at every project I can in here and compare it and see, you know, how much more expensive is this going to be for me? How much more work is this going to take? How much more, you know, babysitting? Do we think we have a real erosion problem? Do we need to proactively start putting down blanket? You know, what do we kind of need to do? And so we're kind of using it as a planning tool right now. And I mean, you can go from a spot, if you look over on the left there, I mean, that is all not suited. And then you can, you know, bump over to the right a little bit and all of a sudden you're in some, you know, moderately to somewhat suited areas. So you can really have some drastic changes in soils in a very short period of time. We aren't necessarily using this to decide pipeline routes right now because there's just too many factors. Any operator in the room knows there's a lot of factors that go into where you put a pipeline. So we're really just using this on the back end and a little bit of the front planning end to say, you know, this is what it's probably going to cost us to do. And we know that we're going to have to spend some extra time and effort here.